Hey guys, this is Live Science. I'm your host, Judy Stroh. This is a new live show that we're starting for Mental Health Awareness Month. I'll be featuring some of the writers of Live Science that I work with. And first up, we have Nicoletta Lanice, who has been on the COVID beat for most part, and we'll be talking about some mental health. Hi, Nicoletta. Welcome.
Hello. How are you?
I'm nervous, but that's my anxiety.
That's all right. For
Related.
full clarity, everyone, this is our first live show using this particular platform. We used to do a live show over on Facebook where we would just hop on Facebook Live and we would answer questions about COVID. This was earlier in the pandemic, and we did that for about 6 months. But this is the first time using this cool new platform, StreamYard.
Yeah.
So we'll see how we do.
Yeah, we're on YouTube as well. So hi, YouTubers, and hi, our Facebook followers as well. And I'll let Nicoletta take it away with her piece.
Sure. So to dive right into it, it is Mental Health Awareness Month. So we wanted to hop on and highlight, just generally introduce the subject of what is mental health, what are we talking about, and discuss in later episodes some of our recent coverage of psychological studies and things of that nature. So to broadly define mental health, just for the purpose of this live stream, we're talking about our overall emotional, psychological, and social well-being. So oftentimes when you hear mental health, you immediately might think of named conditions, perhaps mood disorders such as depression, anxiety, but we're also just talking about day-to-day mental health. So how are you feeling? How are you able to deal with stressors that come your way, things of this nature? And to maintain mental health over time and in face of stressors, there are various strategies you can employ. And there is a reference page on Live Science that you can look up. Simply type in what is mental health, and you can look through interviews that we have with a number of experts on these topics. But generally speaking, our mental health can be affected by a huge plethora of things, including our social relationships, our physical health, our level of productivity, and our sense of purpose in our day-to-day activities. And of course, our access to bare necessities of living. So do we have enough food? Do we have shelter? Small activities of daily living as well. So getting enough sleep, trying to get regular exercise as we can, getting outside, being in touch with people we care about, whether that social network looks like friends, family, having good relationships with coworkers. All these sorts of things can contribute to good mental health. And when these pillars of support are removed for whatever reason, that can have detrimental effects unless we come up with other strategies to manage over time. So we're going to be talking about some of those ideas as we go forward. Of course, in face of the COVID-19 pandemic, we've all had our mental health challenged in some way or another. Many have lost loved ones, so dealing with that grief through time, and also having to deal with the social isolation that comes with distancing and the stress of being out and about in the world where there is a virus that could potentially infect you and get you personally sick. So obviously that's a huge topic in and of itself. So I wanted to zoom in quickly on a particular example that I think is really good of people striving to maintain good mental health in face of really steep challenges during the pandemic. And in that respect, I want to talk about COVID long haulers, who are people who contracted COVID-19 at one point, recovered from their initial infection, but are still experiencing persistent symptoms, after effects, if you will. So these might look like many physical symptoms, so debilitating fatigue, elevated heart rate, far more severe symptoms such as seizures, other neurological symptoms, including brain fog, which is a general feeling of cognitive confusion, dysfunction, which sounds like it would be a mild symptom, but this can manifest in very severe ways and be debilitating in daily life. So when these long haulers experiencing persistent symptoms after they were meant to be recovered from COVID, when these people first started emerging, doctors really didn't have any answers for them because of the lack of testing availability early in the pandemic. many of these people didn't even have an initial COVID diagnosis per se. So they would go to doctors with these persistent symptoms later, and they couldn't always convince them that, number one, they were stemming from a COVID infection that they had at some point. But number two, there wasn't solutions being presented to them because it was still a big question mark. Nobody knew how to address and to handle these new influx of patients dealing with long-term health conditions all of a sudden. So we're dealing with, not in the pandemic, in context, we're not only dealing with a mass death event, we're dealing with a mass disabling event. So people are suddenly coming down with chronic illness that never had chronic illness before. And this, of course, can be super detrimental to mental health because you're dealing with this new, mysterious, and confusing plethora of symptoms that can change through time as well. So it's kind of a grab bag of symptoms for everyone. So what long haulers did in face of not having solutions through the medical field is they came together in many, many support groups, especially online because we can't see each other in person right now. So an example of this would be the Body Politic COVID-19 support group. There's another called Survivor Corps, and there's more that you can look up online. There's some that are split up into smaller groups, so specifically for women with long COVID, quote unquote, is what we refer to it as. So all sorts of things, but you can search these out online if you think you might actually fit into the category. And there's also ways for people who aren't long haulers to help out in these groups and support their advocacy. But I'm going to share a quote with you now from someone who is experiencing long COVID symptoms and at first felt very lost and alone and isolated, but stumbled upon one of these groups earlier this year. So this is a quote from Catherine Nilsson, who spoke with Insider back in April, but was diagnosed with COVID-19 back in December, recovered, and then started having long COVID symptoms. And she says, "I don't know anyone personally who is struggling with post-COVID symptoms, so seeing how many others are having the same symptoms helps validate my own. This is actually happening. I'm not overreacting or imagining it." So that idea of not only coming together to attempt to build a community that can then bolster research for these long haulers in the long term, but these support groups truly are a way to help bridge the gap in the time of extreme isolation and maintain people's mental health and to validate what they're experiencing. So that, in general, this idea of having people in your life who will listen to the problems you're having, empathize with the problems you're having, is key to anyone's mental health, and is a good thing to think about if you have a friend who comes to you with any sort of issue they're struggling with. To be a good listening ear, it really helps to think about validating their feelings and listening to them and believing them. Believing is the first step often to helping someone name the feelings they're having and move towards some sort of concrete solution for themselves. Diminishing those struggles can be brushing them off and it's not that big a deal. For instance, we've all had those conversations with friends, I'm sure, where you go to them with a problem and they respond, "Oh, everybody has that. That doesn't seem like such a big deal." But that can be really detrimental to someone in a time of need. So especially in COVID times when we're all dealing with social isolation and new physical challenges that we didn't experience before, I think that's a good takeaway message from these support groups is being a listening ear can make a huge difference when people are going through really tough times and can help bolster community and spread good mental health amongst a wider population.
You're so smart. Nicoletta gives me a lot of support, and because she's so good at this, she studied psychology in school, and she really knows a lot of good what to say. And yeah, if you guys have any, I really did want to reach out to you guys when I first started. It's my first time, hosting the show and all these new bells and whistles here. Changing that. And so if you guys have any questions or thoughts or comments or stories to share about your struggles during the pandemic, we're we're all ears. We're not doctors, but we can definitely give advice on what doctors and experts have said.
I will just interject here. If you're looking for hotlines or any sort of resources in that respect, I would highly recommend checking out the National Alliance on Mental Illness. So their acronym is NAMI, and they have a huge list of resources that breaks it down at both a national and local level for those living in the US especially. So if you're in need of more immediate help, or if you're looking for groups to join, whatever that group might be for, that's a great resource to start with online.
Yeah. And here's a short video kind of summing this all up. Oh, that was fun. Now we have our other senior writer, Rachel Retner, and her dog Millie to talk about some nice dog and pet related things. How you doing, Rachel?
I'm good. Yeah, I'm here to talk about pets and mental health. And so one side effect of the COVID-19 pandemic is that there has been a reported surge in pet adoptions across the US as people found themselves with extra time at home. And I can relate to this because I adopted my dog, Millie, last year during the pandemic. And so increased pet adoptions are not only good news for pets who need homes, but also for their humans because there's been many studies that have shown that there are mental health benefits to pet ownership. And according to the CDC, owning a pet has been linked with decreased feelings of loneliness as pets provide companionship. And that was something that became particularly important during the pandemic when many people felt isolated. And pets also provide increased opportunities for exercise when we walk or play with our pets. And exercise itself is known to boost mental health. And there are even measurable physiological effects from interacting with animals, including decreased levels of stress, the stress hormone cortisol, and increased levels of the feel-good brain chemicals, dopamine and oxytocin, as well as low blood pressure. And that's according to the American Heart Association. And some recent studies have even looked at the effect of pet ownership on mental health, specifically during the pandemic. For example, a study from researchers in the UK from the University of York surveyed nearly 6,000 UK residents and found that almost 90% of pet owners reported their pets helped them cope emotionally during the pandemic. And the authors conclude that in part that pets may be a social buffer against psychological distress and loneliness. It's important to note, though, that not everyone will necessarily benefit from pet ownership. And for example, some participants in the UK study reported increased worry about caring for their pets during the pandemic. For example, if they were worried they might become ill. And so before adopting a pet, people need to consider whether owning a pet is right for them. And you might consider fostering a pet, which is a good way to get to know an animal before adopting. And I actually fostered Millie before adopting her, and that was a great experience. And I know for me and for others I've spoken with, pets can provide a sense of routine and purpose, which is even more important during these times.
Thanks, Rachel. She's so sweet. How's she been?
Oh, she's good. She's been enjoying getting a lot of treats when she sits here.
What a good girl, Millie. I would show you guys my cat Pete, but he's off napping, and you can't disturb a napping cat. Oh, sorry. So yeah, and Rachel actually does a lot of studies on dogs, and here's a video that we made not too long ago. Even though pets understand our emotions, I think it's our words that we sometimes get caught up on. So check this out.
You probably think your dog is the smartest and cutest when they learn to sit or lay down. But does your dog really know what you're saying? Not exactly. A new study from researchers in Hungary finds that dogs' brains cannot distinguish words that differ by a single speech sound, such as dig versus dog or sit versus set. This makes dogs similar to human infants, who also aren't very adept at distinguishing words with similar sounds. For the study, published December 8th in the journal Royal Society Open Science, the researchers monitored the brainwaves of 17 very good dogs using a technique called EEG. The dogs listened to pre-recorded words that they already knew, like sit, as well as nonsense words that sounded similar, like sut, and nonsense words that sounded very different, like bep. They found that dogs' brains could quickly discriminate the words that they knew from the nonsense words that sounded very different, such as sit versus bep. But their brains made no distinction between the words they knew and the nonsense words that differed in only a single speech sound, like sit versus sut. After hearing about these findings, I couldn't help but perform a non-scientific experiment on my dog, Millie, who recently learned to sit. Sure enough, Millie sat. She also sat when she heard the command sut, but she didn't do anything when she heard the command bep.
Millie bep. Millie bep.
The findings may explain why most dogs pick up only a few human words in their lives, despite being able to hear very well, according to the authors.
So that was a fun video. We now have our editor-in-chief, designer, on.
Hi.
You just adopted your very first dog?
We just got our very first pet, yes, over dog during the pandemic. Daisy. I'm getting her. Anyway,
no worries.
Yeah. Oh, hi, Millie. She's been such a really great addition to the family.
Yeah. How's it been going? Oh, there she is.
She's a bunch of fur. So Daisy, we got her in September. And so she's like 9 months old right now, and she's very much a puppy. Anyway, it was just like we were indoors. We were trying. Gosh, Millie is way better than Daisy. Come on, stay here.
Well, Daisy's a Labradoodle, right? They have a lot of energy.
A lot of energy.
Okay, okay, you can put her down. Sorry, Daisy. We'll interview you next time.
Anyway, so yeah, I just feel like we were stuck inside, and it was just nice to have a pet. I mean, dogs are so great. The boys, I have two boys, and they love wrestling with her and running around with her, and she's super sweet. But she's not calm at all, like Rachel, like your dog seems. How old is Millie?
Millie's 1 year old. We adopted her when she was 6 months old. Like I was saying before, having a pet. It kind of provided a routine and kind of a crazy time when everything seemed to be like upended. You kind of have the routine of taking care of an animal and just also like the unconditional love and companionship they provide.
Yeah, that's been really good for my kids also, especially my 12-year-old, which this has been so tough. You know, the kid's home from school. So, yeah, it's been nice to have a loving animal to snuggle with.
Yeah, I will say, you know, the best thing about dogs, and now my cat does it, is they kind of meet you at the door, like you have a really bad day and you come home and they're just like so excited to see you, and it's like a reset on everything. So that's my own personal experience with mental health and pets. And they also, like, you know, they give you like interesting challenges that you don't really get from humans. So yeah, pets are interesting. Nicoletta, you got a pet?
I have my roommate's cat. Since the start of the pandemic, because we're working from home, he'll sit immediately next to me on the couch. He's not around right now. But most of the time he's right physically touching my leg as I'm writing articles, etc. So I have about 1,000 photos of him just hanging out.
Not as much. I know Pete's still napping in there, so. Yeah, no, I'm a big fan of pets, and I know as soon as we discussed doing this live stream and pets came up, it's like, oh yeah, duh, pets are the best. So I want to thank you guys for sharing your homes and your pets, and we'll be back every Wednesday discussing other mental health topics. And if you guys have questions or comments, feel free to add them after the fact, and we can address them next Wednesday or the Wednesday after that. All right.
Thanks, Judy.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, guys. Bye, Millie.
Bye.